Welcome to day 21 of the 30-day wholesaling challenge. And today I'm going to go over on what to do if a seller wants to back out of your contract. I'm going to show you things to do before, things to do when you get the call, and show you a simple 4-step process to learn how to respond to these types of reactions from your seller. But before I get into it, do me a favor, smash that like button, hit that subscribe button so others can find the real truth on how to get started in wholesaling. So you just got that phone call and your seller says, I went out of the contract. I get it and I understand it. If you haven't had this phone call, you are not doing enough wholesaling. And we've all gotten this call, and if you don't think you're gonna get the call, you just haven't gotten it yet. So I wanna prepare you on what to do. So the first thing we wanna do is some preventative maintenance. That's right. If you do some things before this event happens, it will greatly increase your odds of keeping your contracts right up till the closing day when you assign your contract. Number one, you have to stay in contact with your sellers. You can't just write the contract and then go find a cash buyer for the assignment of your contract and not stay in touch with your sellers. When you do this, it makes them nervous, it makes them question a lot of stuff, and you gotta understand that. The reality is most people are backing out of the contract because they're nervous, they got outside input, and the reality is a lot of you haven't stayed in contact with them. So the day you sign the contract, give them instructions and expectations what's gonna happen. Hey, we've entered a contract. I'm gonna go ahead and take this contract right now. I'm gonna bring it over to the title company, and Sue's gonna reach out to you to verify some information before the end of the day. Just make sure you take that phone call. Once Sue reaches out to him from your title company, Sue's job is to reaffirm the contract and honestly endorse you as the buyer on the contract. Say, listen, Rick does lots of deals. I'm so glad you signed up with him. He's gonna take great care of you. I just need to get your email address, your mailing address, and I gotta get some pertinent information about the property, and I'm gonna handle the closing. And if you have any questions about the closing, please feel free to contact me directly. Honestly, the faster you have the title company call your sellers, the better off you're going to calm their nerves. So start with the expectation, because most of your sellers back out of contracts because you're so excited you get the contract out and they don't hear from you 2 weeks. They think you've backed out. So number one, set the expectation. The other preventative maintenance, have your title company reach out to them. It's their job that day. If they sign the contract at noon, they got to reach out to them before 4 o'clock in the day. Why? Because that first 12 to 24 hours is the critical period in your contracts. If they have the slightest reservation or you make them uneasy and they don't understand the expectation, this is when you're at most risk. So take these two preventative maintenance things to try to be preventative when these events come up. So guys, now I'm going to walk you through the 4-step process on how to respond when you get the phone call that your seller wants to back out. Now, the key word is respond. The reality is most of you don't respond, you react. Okay? And here's the difference on this, guys. A response is an educated, calm communication to a seller. A reaction is just basically unprepared. It's an emotional response. It's not a response at all. It's a reaction. It means you're not in control anymore. You're playing defense, and you need to complete opposite. You need to be prepared for this statement. It's going to come out. People are going to try to back out of contracts. If you're not doing it, you're not writing enough. So the number one thing is you've got to learn to respond and not react. That's rule number one. So once we know we have to respond, you have to prepare for it and you have to know what to say. So I'm going to give you the 4 simple steps to walk through anyone who wants to back out of a contract. And if you follow these 4 simple steps, you can save most of these contracts. You're not going to save them all. Like, you want to write enough contracts where some of them fall out because you're going to get more deals that way. If you're only going to write contracts that 100% stick, you're only going to do about half as many deals as anybody else that does wholesaling. So there is some risk when we do it. Take these 4 steps when you get this phone call. The first one is respond, don't react. How do I respond? First thing, remain calm. Like, I can't stress this enough. You have to be calm. You can't react. Just slow down. No matter how negative you hear the news is, you can't react. They're reacting. You're going to respond. And the only way to do this is you have to start by being calm. The next one, deal with this problem head on. The more you try to avoid it and the more you try to scoot around it, the worse it's going to get. I guarantee you this. Deal with it head on. Don't try to avoid the topic. Just get right into it, because time is your enemy on this. In fact, the more time that goes, the worse the situation. Time is an enemy when your seller has reservations or they want to cancel. So the minute you get that phone call, don't wait 12 hours to call them back. Don't avoid them. Go right in head on. Time is your enemy. If you let 24 hours go by and your seller calls to cancel, you have a high probability of them ghosting you and never showing up to the closing. The minute you get that call, you want to respond, not react. That's step number one. Also, if you can go in person, if you're an in-person market, deal with it in person. Something belly to belly connects with people more. You can read their emotions. Remember, communication is 70% nonverbal. So you got to look them in the eyes, got to see what their hands are, everything. Now, not everyone can do it. If you're doing a virtual market, obviously you can't do it. But if you have the luxury of going in person, meet your sellers in person. Do not try to fix it over the phone if you're in your local market, because it's much more effective to do it in person. Trust me on this. Go deal with it in person. People do not like to reject you when they've signed a contract when you're physically in front of them. It's very upsetting to most people because they know they signed the contract with you. Think about this. If somebody wanted to break up with you, it's easier for them to send a text or an email. It's very hard for them to do it in person. Make sure you take advantage of the strategy. I have much better success rate in person than over the phone. But if you're in a virtual market, you're going to learn to use your ears much better. So now we have step number one, which is respond. Don't react. Step number two is re-examine everything about the deal. And first thing, it starts with your sellers. And what do we want to re-examine? What is their expectations? What did the seller expected and what's changed in that? Honestly, a lot of times it's just your lack of communication. I'm going to be honest with you. It could be lack of communication. I've already told you how to deal with that head on, but if you didn't do it, now you got to really deal with it. That's why I want you to do it up front. So here's another strategy I like to do in the re-examine phase. I like to go back and reaffirm. There's a lot of re's here. It's for a reason. The reason you want to reaffirm why your seller wrote the contract with you in the first place. And go back to it. You should be able to keep it in your CRM notes. You should have it burnt in your brain. But go back and seller say, remember when you met with me, you said you wanted to get the house sold by the end of the month and you wanted a moving truck heading to Colorado by the 30th. And you agreed with the house needed repairs. It was just too overwhelming and it probably wasn't going to qualify for any type of conventional financing. So we agreed on a price that would get you the best net so you could accomplish what you want with your family. Is that still true? Quiet, let them talk. This is part of re-examining. You want to reaffirm that truth so bad. And it's not you that's going to do it, it's your seller's going to do it. Once you can reconfirm that truth, you can find out what's going on here. So as issues are going to come up in this point, you want to find out what's going on. Is it the terms? Is it the price? Is it you? Is it a realtor? Is it the neighbor? Something's changed between the last time you met them. So what you want to do is go back and reaffirm and then identify the issue. You're going to have to keep working through it because here's where people don't want to tell you the truth and they want to hide behind excuses. Your job at this point is to get to the truth. The faster you can get to the truth, the faster you can reaffirm your deal and keep it alive. Step two is going to be about reaffirming your process. So now that we've gone through halfway through it, once you identify and you find out, at this point, you find out the truth, now you want to go into reaffirm. And basically, you have to reestablish, number one, your seller's objectives, and then your agreement. And then you address whatever the change is and the seller's expectation. Now, sometimes the neighbor goes, man, I want to buy that, and they got FOMO. Maybe it's a realtor saying, I can sell it for so much more. There's so many other things. Maybe another wholesaler offered them another price. Just get to the truth, because you were honest with them, you worked through their issue, and you wrote them a contract. You need to protect your interest, but we can't make sellers come to the closing table. For those of you who think you can just force them and tell them, I'm gonna record an affidavit and make you close, you're not gonna like the outcome with it. The sooner you deal back with your sellers and reaffirm your agreement, your commitment. This is kind of the longest process. And once you can identify it, you can now get to the final phase of reconnecting your seller with your wholesale contract. And then this is the part where you're basically going to do what we call the trial close. if I can do this, or if I can close sooner, or if I can give you a few more bucks, if I can give you a bigger deposit, if I can communicate with you more, then you're going to move to phase 4. Now, sometimes you can just be done right here, and then you're all good. But the reality is sometimes if you let too much time go by, or the seller's expectation is just like, hey, we need to change the deal, this is where, in step 4, you just renegotiate. Now, you need to know what the issues are. So if you don't go through this entire process, you can't renegotiate. Here's the truth of the matter. A lot of you guys go from basically, instead of respond, you react, and then you jump immediately down to try to renegotiate. Well, you can't renegotiate if you don't know what the problem is. And if you keep assuming it, let your sellers know what's going on. 9 times out of 10, you just got to reassure them. The problem is most of you let way too much time go by. And if you don't communicate with your sellers within 12 to 24 and 48 hours of writing that contract, that's when you're most at risk. So if you'll do that preventative maintenance up front, it will help. Now, when you renegotiate, I'd rather you take something than nothing. So sometimes you have to give them more money. Sometimes you have to give better terms. Guys, sometimes you just got to be sincere and nice to them. And how many times have you miscommunicated something? I do it all the time. It's just if a miscommunication falls apart and then they don't know what your expectation is and too much time goes by, that's when your seller calls you and go, listen, I want to get out of the contract. And that's what we're trying to prevent. So step 4 is basically going to be the renegotiate. Now, I want to give a final note here and let you know a lot of people, a lot of gurus specifically teach a technique where you threaten your sellers. Like, if you don't close, I'm going to record an affidavit or I'm going to sue you. Honestly, you need them to come to the closing. We are not going to sue people. We don't teach that. And we're not going to go record memorandums because it's reckless. And if you do it without a lawyer and you have not perfected your contract, you can be liable for a defamation of title suit. And I don't want you to do that. So if you guys, I'm going to use the threat. The threat is only used in the very, very end. And it's just, here's how I simply say it. Mr. Seller, we entered into a legal obligation. I've committed to you. You've committed to me. I understand something's changed in your mind and I want to address it. But I have to remind you, I've already committed. I've already spent money with the title company. I've left a deposit. We need to work this out. You running them over is not going to help you. You can remind them of their obligation nicely and strongly, but encourage at the end, go, listen, I want to work with you. Because fighting with them all the way to the end is going to guarantee you can't get a cash buyer to take over your contract because they can't look at the asset from the outside or the inside, and it's going to wind up being a difficult seller. So here's what I want you to do. When you guys get that phone call, go, listen, I need to get out of the contract. Identify what was the problem that went wrong. Usually it's lack of communication and follow-up. But like, don't panic. Don't react. I want you to respond, step 1. Number 2, you're going to re-examine the whole deal. You're going to find out what your seller's expectations, like what changed on it. And the only way to do that is you have to ask. You have to go through it. Deal with it head on. Don't avoid it. Then reaffirm your agreement. And if you can't reaffirm the agreement, try to renegotiate it to save the deal. I'd rather you make something as opposed to nothing. And then most important, learn from this. If it's happened to you, identify what the problem is and plug that hole in your business. 9 times out of 10, it's communication. Please refer back to the beginning of this video where I gave you preventative maintenance to avoid this exact problem. So guys, if a seller ever calls you and says, listen, I need to get out of contract, do not overreact. Follow these 4 steps and make sure you have your title company and you are spending a lot of time with your sellers in the first 3 to 5 days, because honestly, it's the first 24 to 72 hours where you're usually going to get this phone call. And guys, if your seller's ghosting, you're not talking to you, it's your fault. You have to stay in touch with them. Listen, the sellers have problems. We're finding properties with problems. Your job is to solve them. It is very common to have a seller do this. Just go through this 4-step and you can save most of your contracts. So guys, listen, if you got value from this video, do me a favor, smash that like button, hit that subscribe button. This is day 21 of the 30-day wholesale challenge. I'll see you in the next video.